You're listening to Next Pitch, the student athlete playbook for parents raising tomorrow's athletes.
Hi there, my name is Anthony Leveritz. I am the host of the Next Pitch podcast, and I am joined by my producer, who you can't see, but trust me, he's there, Jason Cardona. We are excited to start this journey with you. First series of shows we're going to do is going to be the life cycle of a student athlete and how to best prepare your young people, young student athlete for that journey. We're going to discuss a whole bunch of different topics. Today, we're going to begin with just the beginnings. You know, how do you get involved in athletics as a young person? Should you play multi-sports? Should you do more than one? Is that an important thing? Should you specialize? We all hear this whole specialization thing at a very young age. Is that something you should do or you shouldn't do? And how young is too young to begin? Really dive into those topics and see if we can give you a playbook for what that looks like. I have an incredible guest to start our first show with here, Alex Brink. He's a friend of mine, played in the NFL, played in the CFL. He's a Cougar, which is why my wife likes him. He went to Washington State, and I think he has some record there for beating Huskies, but I don't know if we can talk about that. And just as importantly, he's a parent of two young kids, and his background is great, but he also owns a company called E4 Sports that works with young student athletes at every phase of their journey in multitude of sports, and also spends time as one of the Elite 11's trainers for the Elite 11. So, Alex, thank you for joining us. Super to have you here. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be a part of this.
Yeah, happy to be here, man. Obviously, it's an important topic and, something that I have a deep passion for, as you alluded to, on a lot of levels, both, professionally and personally. So I certainly appreciate you thinking of me, and hopefully we can, have a great conversation about this.
Well, I think we can. Give us your background. I talked a little bit about what you've done, but how do you're in an elevator with somebody and give us your background for the elevator pitch. Who is Alex Brink? How did you get here?
Sure. Born and raised in Eugene, Oregon. Grew up playing sports my whole life. My dad was a collegiate baseball player, so baseball was my first love and kind of my passion early on. But I played multiple sports, soccer, baseball, basketball at a young age, then got into football about sixth grade and, kind of still was a baseball player through that, but really fell in love with, football in my freshman and sophomore year of high school and spent a lot of time, kind of my extra time doing that. My brother was a high-level competitive athlete. He was an elite swimmer, went to the Olympic trials, went to the University of Tennessee. So he was 4 years older than me. So I got to watch him kind of go through that process. And as I got into, my sport journey and collegiate sports and professional sports, and as that played out, I got done and I realized that, I wanted to be able to make an impact in some capacity. I wasn't going to be a coach, full time. It's a tough journey at the collegiate and professional level. And definitely a labor of love at the high school level. And, but with a passion for business and a passion for sport, myself and my business partner, Ryan DePaula, founded E4 Sports about 10 years ago. And, have continued to find ways to help young athletes develop and, families navigate the journeys you're talking about. And as now I have a 4-year-old, soon to be 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old boys, I'm about to become one of those parents that embarks on that journey.
I am also one of those parents that have embarked on that journey. And I
Yes,
know that we're going to talk about this stuff. And we're try to sound like an expert, but I'm telling you, it is the reason why I think this is so important, having coached at the Division I level and then parented I'm probably not Division I as a parent, but it's hard. Like it's really hard. Parenting in general is hard. Then you add the stress and the emotions and the aspirations of a young person seeing stuff on television that they want to aspire to become. How do you manage that process and that cycle? And that's really where the genesis of this podcast began, was just kind of me parenting, knowing how difficult it is to parent, then being at that high level. So I'm hopeful we don't sound too pretentious here, because I certainly haven't gotten it right every step of the way. But I think there are some things that we've learned both from parenting and coaching, and the ability to bring people like you in to talk about this that are going to be super helpful to people. Just before we dive into the subject matter, give me a little bit more. Your story is really interesting. We're going to talk about being a multi-sport athlete, but kind of the whole baseball, football thing that happened for you. And I think a lot of kids kind of go through this. What am I better at? What am I not? What's my best sport? Kind of get the two different times that happened to you in high school and in college, and how that played out for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, I grew up playing multiple sports. I was definitely more, adept at playing baseball as a young athlete, probably because my dad had some influence on that. I practiced it a lot. I was doing the extra work, and we'll talk about the extra work at some point.
Yeah.
And my extra work was spent relatively playing baseball, or practicing baseball, whether that was in the backyard or going somewhere, going to the batting cage, whatever. And so, I definitely was ahead of the curve. Physically, I wasn't a specimen by any means. I was always behind the curve a little bit physically in my athletic journey. But, I get to high school, and I'm a varsity baseball player as a freshman. So I was good. I was a freshman football player, freshman basketball player. I had kind of transferred from one middle school area in Eugene, Oregon, to a different high school area, Sheldon High School, kind of following my brother who went to Sheldon High School. And
you were recruited, so you can be honest. You can be honest.
Yeah,
recruiting started early.
I can assure you I was not, but I'm sure. But by the time I was a senior, of course, everybody wanted to tell that story. But that's a different story about kind of navigating friend circles in middle school, and then figuring out what you want to do, the whole thing. Anyway, I end up at Sheldon. Well, it just so happens that this is my freshman year was year 2 or 3 of a group of coaches led by Marty Johnson, who was the head football coach there for a long time, and his brother Lane Johnson. And essentially they ended up being all-timers, right? Yeah. Like some of the best high school football coaches in Oregon high school football history. Way ahead of their time when it came to offensive football and throwing the ball. And this is 1999, 2000. And so I got there as a freshman and had a really good experience in freshman football. We were undefeated. I kind of was a backup quarterback competing for the spot. Then I ended up being the guy, and just had a ton of fun with it. They called me up to varsity as in the playoffs. And so I got to practice with the varsity and do that whole thing. And so I had a really good experience. Then I played varsity baseball as a freshman and had a good experience. But, this has been a tale as old as time in baseball. It's like when summer hits, it's baseball time pretty much. And so that was kind of the decision. I had to decide, was I going to commit to, baseball, whether it was Legion ball or high school, travel ball, whatever it was, or was I going to commit to our football team workouts. And that's where, as we talk down the line here, figuring out where to put your extra time. And summer, I would consider extra time from an athletic development standpoint. And I had to decide what I was going to be. The decision, though, that was funny was I had to decide if I was going to put in all that work in football to be the varsity backup, because we had a returning starter, a junior who was going to be a senior. So I was going to try and be the backup as a sophomore. And I chose to go that route. And I put in a ton of time, all the weight room, all the things. And, lo and behold, I get the backup job. And then week 1, the starter blows his shoulder out. And I become the starter as a sophomore, play pretty well. We have a really good team, go to the semifinals, I think, or quarterfinals of the playoffs. I get hurt in the quarterfinals. And basically from then on out, I thought of myself as a football player first, and then baseball, and then basketball. And that's where all that time got spent. And I became a recruitable athlete. It was still a heck of a journey, not easy by any means, but that's where I became, Alex Brink, the football player, the quarterback, versus, say the baseball player, pitcher. Still had my opportunities. I was a draftable baseball player, all those sort of things, but ended up sticking with football, getting recruited, scholarship to Washington State, and then obviously moving on to, get drafted in the NFL for a short stint there. So, some people say, hey, it worked out. I would tell you that I got lucky along the way. I trusted my gut and my commitment to things along the way and the people around me, and then just went all in. And, those opportunities come to you, I feel like, sometimes when you do that.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about your experience at Washington State too. But we'll do that the next time we chat with you, because I think that's a little bit more the once you become a college athlete, some of the things that you go through, and we'll chat through that. But let's get back to your youth sports experience, both as a player, but now as an owner of a company that really, I've seen what you guys do. And I know, winning's really important in youth sports to a lot of people, but that's not how you guys approach this for a reason. What is important about getting involved in youth sports? What is, you got a mom that shows up with their child that thinks that they're going to be the next great thing, right? The next Patrick Mahomes, the next Olympic sprinter, whatever that happens to be. What do you have that conversation with that mom, dad, that kid about, hey, you're a second grader. This is why you should be involved in sports. This is what it's going to do for you.
I think there's a lot of layers to that, obviously, and it can be very personal, right? Both to a family or to an athlete in the way that sport impacts you. The reality is that by and large, extracurricular activities, in particular sport, that challenge you and strain you and ask something of you, I think allow you to grow. And so what I would tell most parents is that, when you put kids in sports, you're allowing them to, you're allowing them to learn who they are. You're allowing them to, grow with teammates lots of times. And even if it's an individual sport, you're in some sort of kind of team capacity or some capacity where you have to work with other people in maybe your practice or your development and those sort of things. You learn to, manage, challenges with authority and how to handle coaches and experiences like that. I think the biggest one for me is that, you learn how to fail. And if I were to be able to talk about my sport experience, I would tell you about all the times that it didn't work out for me and how those shaped me and how those impacted, the way I'm going to think about raising my kids, how I deal with, athletes in our program, how I deal with other adults and how I deal with, people in my life, because, I can assure you that, getting cut 3 times in the same year from the Houston Texans shaped me in a certain way, right? The same way that making the B team of my 6th grade basketball team has stayed with me for my entire life. And
I can tell it still doesn't bother you.
No, 100%. But as hard as those moments are, right, I came out the other side and learned something about myself, learned something about other people, other teammates, those sort of things. And ultimately, you're able to, as you manage, that experience, and it's important that the athlete has the people around them that can help them manage that experience and some of those challenges, then you become a really powerful version of yourself. That's what I think sport is. I think it's learning to manage success and failure, learning who you are as an individual, and then ultimately, if handled correctly, coming out the other side and being a stakeholder in sport that is a positive impact on the people around you.
It's a great way of I've told my players for years that the sport, and anybody that will listen to me, but sport is the best classroom for life that you're ever going to find, right? Like, it puts you in those kinds of situations that happen in the workplace, that happen in your relationships, and it gives you a really safe place, or what should be a safe place, to be able to practice what that's going to look like as a young person. And it doesn't just have to be sports, but we're obviously talking about athletics here. Extracurricular activities in general do that for young people, a critical part of that development. One more quick question before we take a quick break here. Is there an age limit to when someone should get involved, right? Like, I've got a kindergartner. Well, you've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Let's make this your situation, right? And I'm sure they're both different too, right? Their developments are, and maybe they're identical, but if they are, you're the first person that's ever had 2 kids exactly alike. But the development of young people, like when should parents start thinking about introducing their kids to sports?
Well, I think it's there's plenty of research on this, but at a really base level, and I think where this conversation should always start, is a philosophy that we follow pretty closely called long-term athlete development, so LTAD. And long-term athlete development, as you walk through it, has different stages for athletes in their life, right? And at the end of it, the goal is to kind of avoid burnout, ultimately maximize success and outcomes. But at the end of it, the goal is that everybody is a positive stakeholder in sports. So you're a fan, you're a dad that wants to coach, you're a referee, you're whatever. Like, your experience from your sport journey was positive because you followed something similar to long-term athlete development. And to that point about kind of when you start and that sort of thing is, it's never too early to introduce sports to your kids, right? My 2-year-old Benny has got a little basketball in his hand and he'll throw it up at a hoop and all these things. But, I'm not managing the process at all. It's what we call learn to discover. So he's discovering sport in that long-term athlete development model. And you want athletes, particularly young pre-K athletes and things like that, to discover sport, all of them. What's a golf club feel like? What's a baseball bat feel like? What's a volleyball? It doesn't matter. Like, just be there, play, have fun, no expectations, right? And so, that's the most important thing. And then from there, you're starting to introduce maybe the idea of team sport or some level of competition, but not really with outcomes based to it, just the idea of competition as they move through that kind of pre-K level. My 4 and 5-year-old is learning what it's like to be on a T-ball team, right? We're not counting runs, but we're, those sort of things. And so you're going through that journey until you get to a point, in an adolescent age where it makes sense, obviously, to have, outcomes and, competition-based things. And I think if you follow that model, you get the desired outcome of an athlete that is well-balanced, well-developed, competitive. We're not shying away from competition and that sort of thing, but you're doing it the right way.
Speaking of well-balanced, we're going to talk about that in our next segment here. We got to take a break. I'll be back here with Alex Brink just a few minutes. Thanks. Welcome back. I'm Anthony Leveritz, host of Next Pitch podcast, joined by Alex Brink. He is former NFL, CFL football player, played at Washington State, and owns E4 Sports. And we're here today talking about the life cycle of a student athlete and really concentrating and focusing on kind of the beginnings of becoming an athlete and what does that look like. Alex, we were talking before the break, just sort of kind of the impact, the classroom that for life that sport can begin to play for a young person. What happens? I see it happen all the time. And when I was coaching, it drove me nuts. But this whole idea that specialization has to happen in the second grade. I got to get on my club soccer team or my club volleyball team or my club basketball team, and I need to play that sport 365 days a year. We all know why that happens. It's money that drives that club sport, AAU sport, and that's going to be an entire show that we allocate to that. But as someone coming in, and I'll go back to that mom and dad with their young person coming in, and I want to be an NFL quarterback, right? I want to be the next Alex Brink. I want to be the next Patrick Mahomes. Like, what is that conversation? Because you don't want to say, well, that's a stupid idea, right? Like, you can't just say you're an idiot. Like, that's not the way you approach parents when they come in. But what is? What do you mean,
dude? I tell you that all the time.
Not to their face, you don't. Well, to me, you do when I'm talking about my son. But what is that? What is that? That conversation about, hey, let's not think about specializing in the second grade.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, the idea of specialization gets a lot of traction, and it's obviously well documented that, specializing as an athlete early leads to, burnout, overdevelopment, injury typically. And I think, the obvious challenge is that, there's kind of a keeping up with the Joneses mentality, right? You see your friends or colleagues or whatever it is, putting their kids in it. You see a kid that maybe is, an athlete, a young athlete that maybe is just, naturally more developed and kind of ahead of the curve. And, the assumption is, well, if my athlete does more, then they'll catch up, right? And that's where always keeping this kind of rooted in the idea of long-term athlete development, I think gives you a framework as a parent, right? That there is no kind of set path, right? You're not catching up to anybody. And I think, the important piece of it when I have these conversations is that, you can be a multi-sport athlete, right? Typically a 3-sport athlete, at worst a 2-sport athlete, right? And manage schedules and manage life, because it's not just about sports, right? You got school, you got family, you got personal life. There's a million things that tie into this, but you could be a multi-sport athlete, and there is extra time if your son or daughter, for that matter, wants to be a great quarterback, and they want to learn, and they want to learn from high-level coaches, because that's really what people perceive they're paying for when they do club sports, typically in like a pay-for-play model, is they feel like they're getting better coaching. And that's maybe true, may not be true. That's an important piece of the process that I would strongly encourage, parents to vet when they go that route, is, are they getting, because that level of development. And candidly, we, E4 Sports is a pay for play model also. And, but we strive ourselves on coaches and programs that are rooted in development and the quality associated with it. And so it's important you vet that piece of it, but that's right. That's what you're paying for. And so you can get those things without committing all of your time and energy and money and resources to one thing. And typically the other sports you're playing have, for sure, some sort of spillover effect to maybe whatever your perceived primary sport is. And I would argue that, most parents and athletes don't actually know what their primary sport is at a young age, or what they might be. And keep in mind, this is not about, can you go, it should never be about, hey, I'm trying to develop my athlete to go pro or go be a collegiate athlete. It should be, how does my athlete have a great experience and develop appropriately, so that somewhere along the line they can make that decision? And again, if you were to follow that LTAD model, it says by the time you're kind of a sophomore, junior in high school, you can start thinking about not specializing, but narrowing down your focus of sports or of where your time goes. Because if you think about, right, sports seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall, you're trying to figure out how your development can fit in those seasons while also playing multiple sports.
So speaking of development, God, there's just so many things that you just talked about that we could deep dive into, but just kind of back to, getting involved in sports, getting involved in team sports. I'm going to play multiple sports. I'm going to get my kid involved in some 6 to 8 week seasons, at the YMCA, and introduce him to 2 or 3 sports, which is what we did with our kids. And it worked great. He found out what he liked and what he didn't like pretty quickly. But what are some other things, developmentally? Like, what is that time frame where you begin thinking about training, right? And I don't mean going and becoming a power lifter. I mean about training your body, having conversations about nutrition, having conversations about how to get ready for practice, having conversations, even just basic things about how to get yourself enough energy to be able to just get a long day of school. I'm a 3rd grader. I'm a disaster anyway after school, and I got to go to practice. Like, when are those conversations? And do you have some resources that you recommend to families, not high-level families yet that are looking at, kids who are being recruited, but kids who want an experience more than just going and being a part of a team sport?
Yeah, I think there's, that's kind of as you get out of that, that kind of learning to train phase and that discovery phase. So in rough generalized terms, you're starting to get into middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And as you think towards high school, because the challenge becomes, the time frame starts to narrow, right, pretty quickly. So if I get into get into high school, and then as a sophomore, I decide, okay, I'm gonna go be a high level basketball player, I may have missed a window of some extra development time I need. Some of the things around strength and nutrition, right? Like, you do have to think about those things without overburdening young people at some point. And hopefully, everybody is subscribing to some level of a lifestyle that allows that anyway. But yeah, as you get into, kind of your middle school years, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, you're starting to talk about, hey, here are some key nutrition pieces. We can't be just eating whatever we want. We can't be drinking a bunch of soda and all these things. If I have goals of developing as an athlete. Why does
everybody pick on soda? Like, it's always soda.
It's pretty terrible for you. That's what I would tell you. It's really, really bad for you. I think and then when you talk about training, it's the same idea, because you're trying to allocate time and resources to, something that we're not sure, right? And I'll use a personal example between you and I, right? Your son, Kyler, I meet him as a sixth grader. You say he wants to play quarterback, but I don't really know if that's a thing, if he should be, whatever, all these conversations and think back to that time, it was, hey, let's expose him to this, see if he likes it. And then from there, you're going to start to find out if it's something you spend more time on and focus on. And so that process takes 12, 18, 24 months. So if you expose an athlete as a sixth grader, say, to a little bit more focused, say a baseball lesson or, something like that, or a softball pitching lesson, they might say, hey, it's not for me. And then you move on to the next thing. Or they might be, boy, I have an aptitude for this. I want to focus on it. But that process typically takes, a year or two before they feel like they want to sink their teeth in. So again, I think anything before middle school, it's just as much as we can expose them to. And then when you're in middle school, as much as you can expose them to, but maybe narrowing the focus on where their extra time goes if they want to be a high level soccer player, let's say.
Yeah, I think really important thing for parents in general to understand is I think the stat is 10% of all high school athletes play a college sport. Only 2% of all high school students get a scholarship to play that college sport. So the benefit that comes from youth sports can't be tied to only if I'm going to be a high level player. Right. It's all the things that go into being an athlete and getting yourself to prepared to be a part of a team, what comes with that, the dynamics that are associated with that. Nutrition, if nutrition is something I believe in deeply, I've watched it impact people's lives over and over again. But if you can expose a young person to good nutrition habits and tie that to something that they love, because I feel better when I play, when I didn't just drink soda, I feel better if I drank water prior to, and my recovery is better. Imagine what that's like for them later on in their life. And so being able to get those experiences out of sports, out of team sports, as opposed to just focusing on, we got to get a scholarship someday. If you're tied to that, you're gonna miss the boat on so many different things that can be valuable in that journey of that kid, whether or not they're a college athlete, a high school athlete, or they just play some sports when they're in junior high.
We can use the example of, say your son again, or even my son, is for a parent, ultimately, if I were to tell you in the end, your son or daughter's experience from youth sports and high school sports, because they were held to a high standard and they talked about more than just winning games and holding up trophies or personal accolades, that in the end, they went to college or entered the workforce or became a mother or father that, understood time management, understood hard work, understood how to manage failure and success, understood, how to handle levels of authority and be able to be a good teammate and be able to lead a healthy lifestyle. Like if those were the outcomes of
I see where you're going here.
of your child's sport journey, right?
That's pretty good.
Then you would say, like that's a win.
Yep.
And sure, like if they became an all Pac-10 quarterback and got drafted by the Houston Texans, or went to the Olympic trials like my brother, like, yeah, my mom and dad are jacked. Like that's so cool. But I think they would argue that the outcome of both of my brother and I's personal sport journey and how it's impacted us as fathers and, as business people and in life is probably more important. I think that's the framework that we should all think about it. So, when we talk about with, young athletes, hey, nutrition and what you eat and how you eat and those sort of things, and the value of working out and strength training and cardiovascular activity. It's about sport specific outcomes, but it's also about the lifestyle you're going to lead after sport. And that's why I always talk about being a stakeholder in sport. It's not necessarily about the outcome of your sport journey specifically, but the outcome at the end of your sport journey. And I think if we all thought of it like that, it'd be a heck of a lot easier for us to swallow when your kid gets put on the sixth grade B team when he deserves to be on the A team.
I made the A team.
Sure. I'm sure he did, and it'd be a lot easier to swallow probably, as a parent, because it's sometimes it's about the parent, but what it really is most of the time is the parent seeing the disappointment in the athlete's face or in the conversation or in their, and dude, I get it. Like I totally do. That is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And how do you have that conversation? And it's starting to frame it around the things we're talking about here and what the ultimate outcomes you're hoping for are. And if you get some of the really cool benefits and opportunities along the way, then that's awesome. But
I think what you just said is a perfect way to kind of wrap this part up is, have a plan for everything, right? And youth sports should be part of the holistic plan of raising your child.
100%.
And taking all of the lessons that can be learned from being a part of some sort of team sport, whatever that happens to be, and using those as part of your parenting to provide real life lessons. If you can get that from the youth sports experience, in addition to some exercise and introduction to something that they may be great at later on in life, you just never know. Sure. But that's the core of it. I have two things I'm going to spring on you here, and since you're our first guest, we're gonna guinea pig this here. So number one, I'm a big crystal ball believer. I talk to my players all the time about building a crystal ball for their future. What I want you to do is build a crystal ball and put yourself back in Alex Brink's life when you're a third, fourth, or fifth grader.
Sure.
Knowing everything that you've been through, what's the just a quick summary of what Alex today would tell Alex of yesterday? Oh, well, many yesterday, getting old now, but many yesterdays ago, what would you tell him?
It's a fantastic question. I'm going to keep it in the context of sport but it's going to kind of spill over a little bit. There's probably two big ones. When I was a young person, like third through sixth grade, had kind of an aptitude for music, was in the choir, really enjoyed it. Like that was something I had, a little bit of a passion for. I think somewhere along the line, sports became a heavy influence in my life. So probably my time got veered away. I think some social pressures of what was perceived to be cool or not cool leaked in there somewhere along the line. And so I kind of lost that. Like I didn't pursue that, an instrument or choir, things like that. And what I found out as I got older, particularly as I became a high level athlete and a high level quarterback, is that I was surrounded lots of times by other players or other athletes and teammates and stuff that had these really unique hobbies or kind of passions. And what I noticed about those guys is it seemed to provide almost a distraction or a balance to their life that at times I felt like I didn't have, because it was a lot about being a quarterback or sport or whatever. And so, I think I would tell my younger self to find that balance outside of even athletics, right? Even multi-sport athletics. What is that other thing? Is it your faith? Maybe is it, again, is it music? Is it reading? Is it whatever? Like, I don't know. Like, there's so many opportunities for you to have that. And I think it helps you as an athlete and as a person, but particularly as an athlete, as you move forward, because, as you experience those moments of failure and those moments of success, you have something else that grounds you, right? That's outside of, your identity as an athlete. And so that's one thing I would have told myself. I think strictly from a sports specific standpoint, and this is what I tell a lot of parents, is I was a skinny, like undersized kid, and we ate healthy around my house, but there wasn't, I didn't get into the idea of kind of general strength training or how to eat and those sort of things. So I was playing catch up like my whole life. And the reality is, just speaking strictly about athletics, if you're not strong and flexible and powerful, you don't prevent injuries very well. You don't maximize your athletic ability very well, but you don't make those adaptations in a microwave. You slow cook them. And so it's got to start early. So I wish I would have had a general knowledge of, age appropriate strength and conditioning earlier in my life, because I think I would have been more developed as an athlete in a positive way than kind of trying to chase it my whole career.
Yeah, both of those things, unbelievable advice. Wouldn't it be nice to have a crystal ball to be able to go back? And it would be so great.
Please.
All right. Now, this is the other thing I'm gonna ask you to do, and this is kind of spontaneous. But everybody likes a good dad joke. And I'm going to have every single guest tell a dad joke. So you got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, you got to have one. I want to hear your best dad joke.
I'm like the least funny person in the world.
You know what? I'll give you one just to let you off the hook.
No. Let me start.
Okay.
I don't have a good dad joke.
Okay.
But what I like to do as a dad
it's fine too.
Is pretend that I'm funny to my 4.5-year-old. So he thinks like, why'd the chicken cross the road jokes are really funny.
Yeah.
Or why'd the, insert joke. So I just make things up.
Yes.
And he thinks they're hilarious.
Yes.
Right. So I'm like, why'd the tree jump in the river? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, because he wanted to get wet. And he's like, yeah. He's in the back of the car, like dying. And I was like, nailed it, Dad.
It's great to be a dad. Wait till they're 14. That won't be as funny. You might get thrown out of the car. All right, man. Well, I sure appreciate you coming on. That was super enjoyable for me. I hope you had a good time. The information is, I think, critical for people to hear, and it's hard. It's not like talking about this that we think it's an easy thing to do. It is a difficult thing to parent in general. Trying to figure out how to add athletics into that is difficult as well. Again, my name's Anthony Leveritz, host of the Next Pitch podcast. I want to just leave you every single time we get a chance to talk to you. The best advice I've ever heard as a parent with an athlete is, remember this: when their games are over, all they want to hear from you is that I love you and I love watching you play. If you can just implement that in your daily life with your young people, your relationship with that student athlete and then back to you is going to be even better. Again, for Jason Cardona, I'm Anthony Leveritz. Thanks for joining us.